On today's show, we've got a big winger that's probably going to be out of the draft in the first three picks of the 2025 NHL Draft. The prospect spotlight is on Porter Martone for today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hattie Kalakash, QMJHL and Crossover Scout for Elite Prospects, with Sebastian High, USHL and Crossover Scout for Elite Prospects. And on today's show, we'll be continuing the Prospect Spotlight series with Porter Martone, the big 6'4" winger from the OHL, has been the talk of the town in the 2025 NHL Draft. You ask different people, you'll get different opinions on him. We'll give you the profile. In the first segment, kind of talk about his size, handedness, production. We'll also talk about his puck skills in the first segment, so shooting, passing, and handling. Then in the second segment, we'll look at the habits, the tools, the toolkit. And then finally, in the final segment, we'll be looking at the projection with Porter Martone. So how does he project to the NHL? What type of role he's going to play? And also in terms of stylistic comparables, and especially which team would be the best fit for him at the 2025 NHL Draft. Before I get into any of that, though, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get up to $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. If you're watching on YouTube, remember to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments, as usual, what you think of the episode. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rate and review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So let's get started right away here with Porter Martone. He's been absolutely lighting it up in the OHL so far this year. Talk me through the size, handedness, and production to get us started here.
Yeah, so Porter Martone is a 6'3", 207-pound right shot right winger who's been playing with the Brampton Steelheads in the OHL this season, and he leads the entire OHL in points per game up to this point. He's the only player averaging more than 2 points every single game, with his 62 points in 30 games. That's 22 goals and 40 assists. So leaning more heavily towards playmaking than he did last season. In his D-1 campaign, he scored 33 goals and 38 assists for 71 points, so a pretty even split there. But this season, especially with that combination with Carson Raykoff, Porter Martone's playmaking game has really quite blossomed. But this is a very skilled player with a lot of tools that we're going to be diving into in today's episode. But here in the first segment, we're going to really focus a little bit more on the puck skills, the shooting ability, the playmaking, as well as the handling. And these are three elements in Porter Martone's game that are quite clearly very big strengths, right?
Yeah, absolutely, they are. I mean, in terms of the shooting, I think it's one of the best skills in his game. It's not the best, but it's still very phenomenal. He's able to release inside of curl and drags, inside of toe drags. He's able to change the angle on his release really, really well and accurately, while still maintaining velocity and power and accuracy on his shot, which is a very important thing when you're shooting at an NHL level. Changing the angle on your shot maximizes the efficiency on it. A lot of the guys who struggle to score in the NHL are static shooters. They're not able to curl pucks around sticks or change the angle of their shot. Martone already has that in his tool bag, and he does it really well. On top of that, he's really selective with when he shoots. He's not a player who spams shots from everywhere. He mainly kind of uses a shot sparingly and effectively, which is very useful. He does take a lot of outside shots, but mainly it's because of the power play setup for Brampton. Plays a lot of time around those dots. He rotates with the bumper spot in and out, but mainly his spot is the dots, and that leads to a lot of outside of the dot shots naturally, but he's still very good. He's still a very good shooter, but I think by far and away the best skill with Porter Martone is the playmaking. He's a phenomenal playmaker. Really, really smart application of delays, manipulation, saucer passes, hook passes, slip passes. He has a lot of different passes in his arsenal, and he's really good at picking which one to pull out at the right moment. Which is very useful when it comes to being able to connect, especially in transition, especially in the offensive zone. And I think that's a skill that's been developed as a result of some lackings in his game, mainly in terms of pace. Really good at delaying because that's easier than kind of accelerating and using a pass, mid stride. A lot of his plays come off of kind of slowing down, drawing in pressure, opening up ice. So naturally, the playmaking's developed a lot given those habits, which we'll get into it in a bit more detail later on. But when you look at the passing in a vacuum, I think it's among the best in this draft class, if not the best. He is a phenomenal passer of the puck. And that especially shines when he's playing with Carson Raycop on that top line for Brampton. Those two have been absolutely electric this season. Raycop is definitely more of a shooter, although he's still able to pass the puck. I think Martone's mainly been the one kind of feeding him pucks into areas and helping him kind of set up those chances to shoot the lights out like Raycop can. And lastly, the handling I think is the lower of the three, even though it's not really far behind the shooting. Kind of really again selective with when he dekes, but given the fact that he slows down with the puck most of the time, it's not like he has a lot of chances to make hard inside out drives or use those hands really effectively. It's mainly kind of small area deking, right? Like that's kind of the way that Martone kind of creates on that side. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would. It's a very interesting player to watch because, especially in games that are more wide open, he's a player that just loves to take the bull by the horns and attack defenses head on. And as you mentioned, with that playmaking ability, how that's developed this season in that combination with Carson Raycop has been fantastic to watch. And coming into the season, I think that we really viewed the shooting and playmaking as quite comparable tools on paper, but there really has been a bit of a gap kind of being created there this season. And I think that's been for the best. We've seen this with big power forward wingers in recent years. I mean, I think of Yuri Slafkovsky, for instance, who's really been exploring that playmaking game since being drafted by the Montreal Canadiens. And I think that's really where you can find a niche with this kind of profile of player, a player with really good strength. He's a very physical kind of player when he wants to be. We'll talk about that later on in the episode, but there's definitely still some hurdles in there on the development path of the physicality. But the ability to forecheck and play make from down low in the offensive zone is something I think is going to open up a lot of opportunities for this player. But to go back to the shooting specifically, I've really liked how he's been able to kind of outgrow slightly bad shooting habits from last season. It's definitely still a work in progress right now, but even when he is taking shots from distance this season, they're a lot more strategic. They're more thought out. They are through screens. They are well timed with flybys. There's a lot more thought process behind it. Whereas last season, I had a couple of viewings where he was just throwing pucks on net when there's any pressure coming
Yep.
towards him. And that habit is definitely receding in his game. There are definitely still some flashes of that and the remnants of it. But I think that the habits supporting the tools have certainly been improving this season. That said, I still think that the conversation between Michael Misa and Port Martone specifically is one between, I guess, maturity in habits and runway in terms of habits and development. With Porter Martone, whichever team drafts him will be able to mold him into a variety of different things, which has a bit less certainty right now, but is really, really intriguing if you are a development staff, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a key kind of component when it comes to development is, when you have a player with this much room for runway and these many, like that many routes in terms of what you can take, I think what'll matter the most with Martone is sticking to one route and sticking to it all the way to the end. Because you don't want to confuse a player on what kind of identity you want from him. Do you want to lean into Martone's pesty kind of tendencies and make him a true like in your face, hard nosed kind of, post whistle scrum kind of player who's still able to bring that high end skill? Do you want to go all in on the playmaking? Do you want to develop him into a shooter? There are different routes you can take with Martone. I think whatever happens and whichever team drafts him, I think the most important thing with Martone for his development is to stick to one route and stick to it all the way to the end. And that's, I think, what's going to conduce the better results with Martone because as he develops into that kind of mold of player you want to be, um, the molded player we want him to be, he's also going to be developing the surrounding skills around that, which I think will be very important. So even if you're developing Martone into a playmaking winger, he's still going to be taking shots. He's still going to be playing off of teammates, learning how teammates shoots, and applying that to his game. He's a really smart player. So yeah, we'll get into those kind of details about toolkit and habits and all that stuff a bit more in the second segment. We'll take a quick break first and get into that here. Locked on NHL prospects.
From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need to place same-game parlays, live bets, and so much more. Whether you want to take your swings on the NFL playoffs and American football, or perhaps European football with the Champions League resuming now in the new year, the choice really is up to you. Or perhaps you prefer tennis or golf, or if you're listening to this podcast, just maybe hockey is your sport of choice. Whatever it may be, FanDuel has something to offer every sort of sports fan. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
Alrighty, so moving on to the second segment here, regarding Porter Martone's habits, tools, and toolkit. We'll get into the bigger details of Martone's game, kind of delve deep into what he does that makes him effective in the OHL outside of just being a highly skilled player. Because it's one thing to be very skilled like Martone is, having a great shot, having phenomenal playmaking skill, good hands. It's how you put it together, how those tools work together, and how you combine them to create that's very, very important moving forward in order to be a projectable NHLer. So let's start with the habits. We already talked about the shooting habits being a thing that's a work in progress, something that he's working on slowly but surely and kind of developing into a strength. It's not there yet, but he makes up for it with high-end selectiveness regarding his shot. And just the heaviness and accuracy of it is good enough to make him produce. I mean, we saw it at the U18 Worlds last year. The combination of him and Gavin McKenna was absolutely phenomenal. He's able to create, he's able to produce. But it's about how he does it in a projectable level, how those tools work together. I want to start with the handling and shooting combination. And how those tools work off each other. Like I mentioned, curl and drags around sticks. He's able to change and modulate the location of his shot from his body. He's able to pull it in close and kind of shoot with some downwards motion. He's able to keep the puck out wide and just use pure torque through his arms. There's different ways that he can get shots off, but I think the main thing that I still want to see from Martone is in motion plays, in motion shots, moving his feet through transition plays and shooting in stride. I still haven't seen that all that much from Martone. It's a lot of plays where he needs to shoot or he needs to pass from a glide. Would you agree?
I definitely would. I think that in combination with pace are probably the two biggest question marks with this profile in terms of translating the offensive potency from the OHL to the NHL.
Yeah.
That desire to slow things down in that split second before making a play is something that he will have to grow out of if he wants to become a top line scorer in the NHL. You don't see players in those roles that have to slow the play down, have to slow down to a glide in order to execute, whether it be a shot or cross seam pass, whatever it may be. And that in turn will also really help him develop his deceptiveness. In flashes, this is a very deceptive player. As you mentioned, with that interplay between the handling and the shooting, I'd also add in using the shot as a playmaking tool to make defenders bite into that, and then using his handling to very, very fluidly switch to a passing position and send the puck across the ice to a teammate. There are these really fantastic flashes of everything coming together into one seemingly cohesive package for one play, for one sequence, but the consistency there is still a work in progress, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very interesting. You mentioned that kind of ability to use his shooting, passing, and handling in combination. I also think his shooting being used as a playmaking tool also applies to the location he chooses to shoot. Lots of blocker side shots, lots of pad shots, 4 rebounds, 4 kind of triangular plays. I also think he uses the boards really well in his playmaking. Very good at kind of chipping pucks past one layer, or kind of using the boards even laterally cross ice, just slapping the hell out of a puck cross ice for it to bounce off the boards and land in an area for his teammate. He has those tools. It's really about using that pace a bit better. And I think it has to do with the skating a slight bit. I think he's a below average NHL projection skater for sure. There's some lackings in terms of explosiveness, in terms of agility. Stride recoveries are kind of a bit wide. It has to do with his size and kind of still learning how to use it, learning how to leverage his skating mechanics in better ways. But I think overall, it goes beyond the skating. I think it's also mental. Like Martone is a play. He's a player who slows down the play. That's his kind of. He's developed that as an identity. He's still able to push past the player. He's able to use his physical tools to circumvent that when he needs to, and in terms of getting past a layer of defense. But it's still something that's lacking in this game. I think pace is really the main issue. It's been the issue all year. It's why, for the moment, I prefer Michael Misa of the two, even though there's a big conversation to be had there. I still think that Martone has a bit of a step behind on Misa regarding pace. Like, Misa is all pace. Like, that's his game. And in the NHL, it's really pace that dominates. You need to be able to make plays at high speeds. Um, so Martone learning to use his hands while skating, learning to use his shot while skating, and learning to pass while skating will be essential for his projection as an NHLer. Another part of his toolkit I want to focus on is kind of how the tools blend into his defensive game, because Martone's been inconsistent on that side, right?
He definitely has. There've been flashes of it functioning quite well. I think I've caught like 2 viewings this season where I thought that he was like a net positive defensive player and getting involved quite well. And in those games, this is a player with a very active stick. He has a really long reach, and he's able to use that to pick pockets in the neutral zone, support on the forecheck as well. In the defensive zone, nothing overly fancy, but a player that can have good scanning habits. Again, consistency still being a bit of an issue here, but at his best, he's a good scanner, gets in good positions, uses his stick well, doesn't get overly aggressive, doesn't allow attackers to get around him very easily. He's a pretty big obstacle, both physically and with that stick, and I think that there is runway for him to develop into a decent like defensive piece. I wouldn't say that he has like the potential to be like a defensive insulator on a top line, but he could be a player that can drop down low, support, and then also be in a good position to help in that breakout, because again, that skating ability isn't the biggest strength. If you want him to help in the breakout, you want him to drop low and then make some connective passes with that high end vision. But to focus on one other element here, the physicality. This is a very interesting part of his game, and we've already talked about it quite a lot this season, because he is strong, he is violent, but he's not a player that creates the small physical advantages. He goes for a booming hit at one point and then has a couple quieter shifts. So where do you think his physical projection lies at the NHL level, and what does he have to do to make it as effective as possible?
I think in terms of the improvements required, I think it again comes back to pace. I mean, it's really hard to leverage your center of gravity when you're not skating at your full speed, when you're not modulating your speed, accelerating, decelerating. These are all things that improve your physical tools. You look at Michael Misa, for example, on the forecheck. Full speed through the neutral zone. He gets to the boards. He's able to slow down while pushing against a defender. He's able to use defenders' momentum against them. He's able to outthink them in terms of quick breaks, quick cutbacks, quick changes of pace along the boards. And that's what makes Michael Misa such an effective physical player. With Martone, what makes him an effective physical player is the overwhelming physical tools that he has, being 6'3", 207 pounds, having a wide kind of a wide range where he can cover a lot of ice with his hands and his legs, kind of in terms of what he protects. But the protection mechanics aren't really that good. It's really about just being stronger than opponents. When he faces off against a 6'4", 220-pound defender in the OHL, you see a gap there, right? Like he does have some limitations when it comes to that. So for me, the big question is, can he develop his mechanics to a point where he doesn't need his size all that much? Because I think that's the main issue when it comes to bigger players who have been bigger their whole lives, is you don't really learn the physical mechanics because you don't really need them. Michael Misa was smaller than everyone else at some point, and you can tell by the way that he lowers the center of gravity, kind of fights off checks, right? Like, that's kind of what makes Misa effective as a player along the boards, whereas Martone is just strength, right?
Absolutely. I think I couldn't have said it better myself. And I'm definitely in the same camp as well in terms of preferring Michael Misa's physical projection at this stage, despite being a much smaller and less imposing opponent than Porter Martone is. But just to talk a little bit about the tool grades here for Porter Martone, the skating, I think, is quite clearly the weakest of the bunch, right? Like at Elite Prospects in our most recent top 50 ranking, we had him down as a 4.5 grade skater, so below NHL average. I think that's something that I would definitely want to work on, and I think that definitely goes together with that pace of play that we've been talking about in terms of something that definitely needs some work. If I were the team that drafts him, I would just tie him around Barb Underhill's waist for about a year and allow him to just like really learn some better habits in that skating and especially how to integrate the mobility in with all of his overwhelmingly high-end tools on the ice. While the shot we have as a 6.5 grade, the playmaking, as you mentioned, is so strong at a 7.5 on this 9-point grade scale. But talk me through the final three tools here, because we have sense, we have physicality, and we have handling.
So yeah, handling ended up as a 6 on our grade scale, the lower of the puck skills, as we mentioned at the start of the episode. The sense grade earned a 7.5 because of that ability to just anticipate and deceive his way into high end passes, especially cross ice. And the physical tools earned a 6.5. Ironically, the same grade as Michael Misa, who's 2 inches and about 20 pounds lighter. So it gives you a good idea of kind of how those two project, where Martone's frame actually, when it comes to elite prospects grade scale, we count physical tools like the size of the player, the strength of the player into equation when measuring our physical grade scale. So the fact that Misa, being 2 inches and 20 pounds lighter, has the same tool grade as Martone in that area means that there's a gap in mechanics. There's a gap in the ability to use their body effectively. But that's our second segment done. We'll get into our third segment here in just a sec, where we talk about the projection, stylistic comps for Porter Martone, and which team would be the best fit. But just before, let's take a quick break and hear from our sponsors. Did Rocket Money help you find subscriptions that you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That's definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even know I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. For me, one of the best features is the subscription tracker. I've used it to cancel services I wasn't using anymore, and I've already saved a ton of money. And plus, with their goals features, I'm able to automatically set aside money for my future, so no more stressing about budgeting every month. So cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Alrighty, so let's close things off here. For our final segment, we'll be focusing on the projection, the stylistic comps for Porter Martone, and which team would be the best fit for him in the 2025 NHL Draft. Let's start with the draft projection. From what I've heard, a lot of teams are very bullish on Martone, others a bit less. It's pretty much all over the place at this stage, as it usually is when it comes to a draft with no clear, fully decided top pick in the draft. So what's your take on where Martone ends up? Like I don't really see a scenario where he leaves the top 4 in the draft. Would you agree with that?
Completely. Like for me, it's the 2 to 4 range is where he's going to fall. He could go as high as second. I'd be surprised if he went first because, again, as we've mentioned in this episode, the concerns with pace, the inconsistencies. I think there's enough like rawness in this profile for a team to be concerned about taking that swing at number 1. And there are alternative candidates this season for that position, whether it's James Higgins or Matthew Schaefer or Michael Misa even, which probably won't happen because it's the NHL, but you never know.
Yeah.
That said, I think, as you mentioned, 4 is kind of the basement for it because the tools are so overwhelmingly good. Again, he's over 2 points a game so far in the OHL. He's the only player in the entire CHL, I believe, with a decent sample size this season, over 2 points per game. There's so much to like here, and I think he with that frame, he's not going to be available at 5th overall.
Yeah, although I will say Andrew Crystal being moved to Spokane might change that very quickly. He just had a 6.9.
Yes. Oh my god. Okay.
Him and Berkeley Catton are becoming something over in the WHL. Those two have been combining really well. But to come back to our point here, the other projection we'll look at is the NHL projection with Martone. He really strikes me as kind of, in terms of realistic projection, a complementary top line winger or the best player on a second line you can find. That's kind of the average projection for me. The higher end upside is it becomes a top 10, top 15 winger in the NHL. If he develops properly, if he learns to use that pace a bit better, leans into those physical tools and kind of learns to leverage his mechanics a bit better. Like if he progresses the way that I think he can, I think there's a chance that you're talking about a 90 plus, 100 plus point player if he develops properly and plays with the right players. But in terms of average projection, complementary top line winger, best player on a second line is kind of where we're kind of both in agreement upon in terms of projection. In terms of stylistic comp, I think there's a very easy one, and it's Corey Perry. In terms of his prime, maybe more of a playmaking Corey Perry than Perry was in his prime, but I still think that Perry's playmaking went underrated because he was playing with Ryan Getzlaf for so long. But overall, the same peskiness, the same annoyingness between whistles, kind of cheap shots he always gets away with somehow, and just also that high-end skill from a low pace while having not the best skating stride. I think that combination of skills that Martone has fits Corey Perry to a T. I think another comparable would probably be lower, like a lower skating Matthew Tkachuk. And that's really what Martone's trying to build his game off of. If you ask him, he's trying to mold his game after Matthew Tkachuk, which I think is fine. Given his skill set, given what he's good at, I think that's a decent path to try to follow. But lastly, you had one that kind of surprised me a little bit when we were looking at kind of current NHL scores. Talk me through your kind of comparable for Porter Martone.
Yeah, again, this is very much based off of current run of form, but Kirill Marchenko stood out to me. I mean, this is a player who's in the midst of a breakout campaign this season, 18 goals and 47 points in just 43 games for the Columbus Blue Jackets, playing big first-line minutes. But the combination of a really, really potent shot, really blossoming playmaking. This is the big thing with Marchenko this season that's been different from the last years, is that the playmaking has completely evolved in a really wonderful way for the Blue Jackets, and you combine that with a massive physical frame, the ability to really impose himself physically, but the lack of consistency in that. And I definitely see some links back to Porter Martone. So for NHL fans that are perhaps newer fans of the game and have been watching a lot this season, Marchenko is kind of stylistically similar. I think with Martone, you have perhaps a little bit more dynamic upside than Marchenko possesses in terms of on-puck ability and puck carrying game. But in terms of the tools and the profile, perhaps from a bit more of a distance, I definitely see some links there. But to move on, which teams do you think would be good fits for Porter Martone? The selection here is pretty limited because, as we mentioned, we think that he's going to be in that glut between 2nd and 4th overall. But there's a lot of teams that are very much in that mix in the draft lottery at the moment, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll go kind of rapid fire on these because there's 5 we want to talk about. Philly would be a great fit just because Martone plays Philly style hockey, and they would probably love a player like him. Nashville needs a high-end upside piece. I think that he fits really well in that mold. So if they're looking for a big body that can also bring a lot of upside, I think Martone, in terms of runway, is very, very interesting for him. San Jose and Chicago are kind of basically the same kind of element. I think that Martone would work incredibly well with Connor Bedard, in terms of being that playmaking force and letting Bedard kind of handle transition scenarios and then play a quick give and go at the blue line and find Bedard in the slot for a shot. That's a great combination of skills. That'll work really well. And the same goes for Macklin Celebrini in San Jose. So, I mean, Martone would be a great fit with him because Celebrini handles a lot of forechecking scenarios. He's often the F1. He's often digging into pucks in the offensive end. He's also really good at getting off the boards, using a skating and transition. He literally has some of the best transition metrics in the whole NHL this year. And yeah, that'll help Martone just really focus on playmaking, be the guy that feeds him pucks into areas off the give and go at the blue line. So both of them kind of fit well, San Jose and Chicago, for Martone for that reason. But lastly, I really like the fit with Seattle. First of all, Carson Rakoff, also a Seattle draft pick. If Seattle managed to get a 3 or 4 overall pick in this draft, I think it'd be a fantastic combination because they have a long line of centers that could work really well. Shane Wright with his goal scoring and off puck smarts, Matty Beniers with his high end intensity, Berkeley Cannon with his pure transition driving skill as well. Like there are just so many combinations of skills that work well there with Porter Martone, and you just stick Rakoff next to him, and he'll produce. That's just how it is. But that's our final segment done. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, remember to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you thought of the episode. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rate and review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, find Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. Find Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And as usual, we'll be back for the rest of January covering all of the prospects world. We'll have a ringside roundup this week as well for the top performers. Make sure to tune in for that. This has been Hattie Kalikesh with Sebastian High. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope you tune in next time.